Hi, I'm Li Xueying, and you're listening to Asian Insider. In this episode, the Straits Times Philippines correspondent Mara Cepeda shares her experience praying at a church and getting her fortunes told. Good to have you on the show, Mara.
Hello, nice to see you again.
Hi.
I'm so glad to be
Yes, so
here.
Mara, you have news for us. I think you are to have two husbands, a pair of twins, and you are leaving journalism because you have a lucrative business. So tell me more about that.
Yeah. Let this be my unofficial resignation
Good
message. I'm
luck.
just kidding. I love being with the
Thank
Straits
you.
Times, but
We love you too.
I actually had my fortune told at this district in the Philippine capital Manila called Quiapo. It's a place where I would say the sacred, the divine, and a lot of the paganistic rituals mesh together. And I feel like really wanted to feature it for our letter from the bureau, just because I think it captures pretty much the religion situation here in the Philippines. We're primarily a Catholic country,
80%, I
the
think, right?
dominant Catholic country.
Yes.
Yes, 80%. And the biggest one also in Southeast Asia. And in Quiapo, there's this church called the Quiapo Church, or the National Shrine for the image of the Black Nazarene, which is an image of Jesus Christ kneeling as he's carrying his cross, but he has a dark skin. And a lot of the devotees believe that that image is miraculous. And so when you go to Quiapo, people kind of like expect you that you will go and visit to the church. But the thing is, the very unique thing, if you go out of the church, there's going to be a line of vendors selling images of the Black Nazarene, Jesus Christ, Mama Mary, rosaries, the usual, right? But there are also vendors who will be selling supposedly different kinds of love potions and certain medicines as well to cure certain conditions, even supposedly to help end pregnancies. In the Philippines, you see, we are only one of two countries in the world apart from the Vatican that doesn't have divorce. And because we're that conservative, we also don't have abortion. There's this unique thing happening there. There are also fortune tellers, just having their stalls outside of the church. And so I said, I think for this piece, I kind of want to live through the experience that a lot of Filipinos would go through if they visit Quiapo. So I visited the church first. I'm
Mm,
Catholic, so I prayed
yes.
to the image of the Black Nazarene that's in front of that it is on the altar. And then I went out, and just literally a few steps outside of the church is the little stall of Madame Ao. And her prediction is that I will be having two husbands.
Simultaneously?
One of them, no, no. Apparently, I will get
Oh,
divorced
you will.
twice. So,
Okay.
yes, she wasn't clear. She said I was going to have twins, but she didn't share who among my first or my two husbands would be it. But then she said that I shouldn't cry for men.
Mm,
They should be crying for
right.
me.
That's good
And that
advice.
even if
Yes.
maybe,
Yes.
yes, and that if I'm going to be unlucky in love,
Oh,
I will have some good fortune and money. So that was the fortune that I got. And then after I did my interviews as well for the story, just before I went back to my car, I went back to um, the church and prayed again.
for, and said
I did.
sorry for seeking your fortune.
Yes. Well, I mean, as a Catholic, I do believe that, we can't really tell God what we want. All you can do is, ask Him, request, but there has to be this humility that God has a better plan for you. So I said, okay, regardless of the prediction of Madame Ao, if that's going to be your plan for me, I actually just prayed for openness, and the strength of heart and mind to accept whatever it is God's plan will be for me. And I think that, and I knew at that moment while I was praying that probably a lot of the other Filipinos inside a church probably had the same experience. If they didn't had their fortune told, they probably bought, something mystical on the streets outside of the
Yeah, so
church.
I found that really fascinating because I think this probably is
Mm,
a story, a broader story, right, of how the Filipinos are really able to hold space for both practices, both the faith as well as the belief
yes.
in these mystical traditions, these occult practices. So tell me why that is so. Why is it that there is this ability to sort of reconcile two seemingly very contradictory kind
Mm.
of belief systems within themselves?
The Philippines, we were colonized by the Spaniards for 333 years. They brought Christianity here, and that pretty much kind of dictated the rest of society for us. But I think a lot of our Filipino historians would always want people to remember that before the Spaniards came in, the pre colonial Filipinos already had this rich, vibrant culture and traditions and beliefs. When it comes to the belief in the divine, pre-colonial Filipinos, believed in elementals, believed in different gods that are tied to or the different elements. We have a sky god, we have goddess and
Mm-hmm.
goddesses of the water, of the forest. Either good or bad, it depends on whether you're a good or bad person. And the Spanish friars, to help introduce Christianity, kind of meshed together some of these pre-colonial beliefs into how they taught Catholic teachings. And I think that kind of, even if we're still predominantly Catholic now, a lot of Filipinos, would be very devout Catholics, but at the same time, would buy rosaries because they're afraid certain elemental creatures or creatures from the night would come. But if we have a cross outside of our house, then we will be protected. And I think that's very uniquely Filipino as well.
Yeah. So, and I was especially taken by, what this
Mm,
priest said. I think in your story, I think it's Father Valdez, and he said, "Why do
yes.
people buy these oils and talisman instead of going to the doctor? It's because they can't afford it. So we listen to these concerns." So
Mm,
it sounds like the church leaders, at least for this particular church in Quiapo, have a great deal of understanding as to the root causes as to why people needed to believe in something else
yes.
beyond the church. Can
All
you
right.
tell me more about that and whether that is reflective of the larger church establishment's beliefs and value system within the Philippines?
Hmm. Oh, certainly. If you live in the Philippines, we're still a developing nation. A majority of Filipinos, still live below poverty line. And when you live hand to mouth every day and you're desperate, many of them, hold on to God. And Quiapo Church has developed this reputation as the place where the masses go. So these are not the folks, who are your
Mm,
CEOs. They're not going to be going to Quiapo
mm,
Church. They're not going to be the ones, lining up and going to the annual fest for the Black Nazarene, joining hundreds of thousands of Filipinos in a bid to wipe white cloths on the miraculous image to bring luck and blessings into their life. It's really going to be the ordinary folk who have nothing else to hold on to but the Lord. And in a socioeconomic reading of it, these are also the folks who cannot afford to go to the hospital, who cannot afford to buy the medicine that they need. And so they naturally gravitate to the vendors outside of Quiapo Church who sell concoctions, like not just love
yes.
potions, but different supposedly medicine, anywhere from curing
Mm,
arthritis or sometimes for some women who well, as I mentioned earlier, abortion is illegal here. So some vendors claim that some of the products that they're selling will be an abortifacient. So obviously that is illegal here. And but the local government and the church leaders inside Quiapo Church have come to accept that for some of these Filipinos, since they cannot go to a regular hospital or to a regular pharmacy, they can only afford to buy these medicines here. And for our Catholic Church, it's very rooted very much in liberation theology, where the principle of the church is you have to guide the flock and understand that it will always have a bias for those who are poor, and the ministry will always favor bringing in the people who may be lost in their way because they are othered by society. And the church kind of like plays this role where it will try to um, address some of the lacking social services that the government cannot
yes.
afford. And so according to
Mm,
Father Earl Verdes, who was among the church leaders of
mm,
Quiapo Church about 2 years ago, now he's taking his master's in Rome. He's saying that the church has decided not, first of all, not to ban the vendors because they're they're also accepting the fact that people not only go there, but the vendors themselves need to earn money. So what they do is that they set up an office of social concerns, and the church has allotted a part of its funds, so that those who go to Capo Church looking for alternative medicine, or even just money so they can go back home, they will no longer have to buy the unsafe products being sold outside the church, and now they have some money that they can use to purchase medicine that is safe for them. The church leaders as well, when they do their homilies, they warn the churchgoers that the products that you see outside are not medically safe, so we caution you against buying them, or be very careful when you choose them. And so for Father Earl, it's also an acceptance that this is the reality for a lot of Filipinos. You have to accept that that's the socioeconomic status reality that their ministry needs to contend with, and so it's a delicate balancing act. But I feel like it works for the church. And actually, when I found out that there is an office for social concerns, I think, to me, that was such a good innovation of the church. Now a lot of the churches here have that. It means it's really quite unique for Quiapo. So it kind of also tells us what kind of people go there and turn to the Lord for help. So you can pray, but also you actually will get concrete help from the church. And I think that's something that a lot of churches in developing nations are actually
Mm,
doing as part of the
yes.
ministry, right? You can't just be praying forever. Somehow you need to feel the actual
The
help from
social
the church.
welfare side of things as well.
Yes,
But how
yes.
do they deal with people who do believe in the
Mm.
powers, the mystical powers of the potions or
Mm.
the amulets that they might be buying outside of the church? How does the church deal with
Mhm.
that?
Well, according to Father Earl, it's also going to be part of the homilies, or in everyday conversations with the people there. So they tell them that this is the belief, but then I think they would segue the conversation into a chance to talk about whatever is the church doctrine on it, right? Okay, if say you have a crush and you want to give him the love potion, then the conversation would be about, how do you choose a partner? What kind of partner does the Lord want for you? And if this is the love that is meant for you, the Lord will not want you to force it, right? He has a plan for it, so it will come. So it's a healthier conversation, and they're directed more into dogma, they're directed more into Bible verses, without necessarily condemning the
Mm,
seller
right.
outside.
Okay. And can you just tell us more broadly what is the state of religiosity in the Philippines today? So, as we talked about earlier, 80% of the Filipinos are
Mm,
Catholics. It is the only
yes,
Christian nation in Asia, so that's quite unique in that sense.
yes.
Is this on the rise? How is it affecting, policies and laws in the Philippines? For instance, I do know that there has been a renewed attempt to make divorce legal in the Philippines, and
Mm-hmm,
this is after many, many
mm-hmm.
decades of attempts. How is that going? Do you see this as having any kind of traction in succeeding?
Oh, the Philippines is still pretty much conservative overall, but it's kind of interesting as well, because even if we're a Christian nation, for example, we also are becoming more welcoming of members of the LGBT community, meaning they're entertainers. We welcome them, but we don't have anti-discrimination laws. When it comes to divorce, I think that would be the ultimate test of where we are in terms of, are we progressive in our interpretation as a people of the Catholic Christian
Mm,
faith, or are we still conservative? And I think ultimately the fact that the divorce bill is just being refiled and
mm,
refiled and doesn't really become law, and it's usually not supported by lawmakers. Usually, the pastor lawmakers or Christian Catholic leaders in their own communities who become lawmakers are the ones who are really strongly lobbying against it. And those who might be open for it, they're usually far outnumbered. And the lawmakers will not vote for divorce if it's not something that a majority of Filipinos support. So until today, we still do not have divorce, and I think that kind of reflects it. There's certain we could be very progressive, for example, in our openness, but then ultimately, when it comes to institutionalizing some of these policies that may be deemed as, a sin or contrary to the Lord's teaching, it's not translating into law. So I
Right. So
feel
it
like
doesn't
it
sound
was
like
pretty much
mindsets
a
are
sort of
changing on that front. Not among the
no.
popular.
Maybe I think for a
Mm,
majority, but obviously for the youth, the Gen
mm,
Zs and the millennials, we're more of the progressive people, right? We're the ones who are more open. We're the ones who are pushing for divorce or the legalization of rights for the LGBT community, for example. But ultimately, if the people in power and the ones who actually have the decision making powers will still subscribe to a more conservative leaning, then that's really
but
how it
as the
is.
millennials and the Gen Zs, come of age and they hold a greater share of the voting power in the Philippines, does that not push the lawmakers in a certain direction?
Well, certainly it does. For example, in the 2025 elections, we saw some traditional politicians who are part of dynastic clans. Some of them are former rock stars or celebrities. They didn't win because the Gen Zs really pushed back against corruption, pushed back against personality politics. So I think there is a lot of progress in that regard. But then religion, it's so deeply intertwined with who you are as a person. So introducing institutional changes in government is going to take a lot more a lot more pushback if the Gen Zs and the millennials would want these reforms to come in.
So I was just thinking that at this juncture in the world, where we do see a rise in far right politics, and much of that is being driven by Christian evangelicals, how is that playing out in the Philippines as well? Whether you see a rise in the collapsing of far right ideology and Christian ideology
Mm.
within the Philippines.
I think this is coming from, of course, in the aftermath of the killing of Charlie Kirk. But in the Philippine context, I think we can apply this with the Filipinos' fascination with our former president, Rodrigo Duterte. A lot of his supporters are the masses who actually go to Quiapo, who are devout Catholics, who are devout Christians, and yet somehow are able to justify his bloody drug war that claimed thousands of lives. He's now in the International Criminal Court because of it. And I think, in a way, that also, tying back to the fact that we have this district in Manila where where faith and folklore intertwine, then we also have a society where you can be against killing but somehow love a person whose policy was either to
Mm.
kill or whose policy was not to give rights or not to support the rights of certain sectors of society. And I think that's something that even church leaders, scholars, academics, and even journalists are still grappling to this day. Probably, there are certain aspects of Rodrigo Duterte that you accept, and because you treat him like an idol, um, you put him in this such high
Pedestal. Mm.
pedestal in an ivory
Mm.
tower, then everything else you kind of sort of just justify it because he's your idol, which of course is something that the church in here doesn't want Filipinos to subscribe to. They would always go back to, if Jesus Christ were alive today, then he would be walking among those who are the victims of the drug war, or he would be walking among the ostracized members of the LGBT community, for example. But again, it's very difficult. I mean, there are also conservative church leaders here who wield so much power, and I feel it's kind of a reflection of the Catholic Church in general. From Pope Francis, we kind of went to Pope Leo, who's kind of in the middle, right? There were concerns: will the cardinals elect someone who is going to bring the church into a more conservative track again after having a very liberal Jesuit pope? But then the church decided to go for someone who kind of be in the middle. And so I think the Catholic Church here in the Philippines and Christian leaders as well are kind of following that track, accepting the realities, these
Mm.
dualities in Filipino
Yes.
faith and religion, and trying to kind of accommodate space for
How
everyone.
much power do the church leaders play in politics in the Philippines?
Oh, they're very, very powerful. I mean, when the church wants to be involved, they can influence politics. I mean, there was a time a few years ago when our former president wanted to um, legalize universal access for everyone, including universal access to contraceptives, there was a lot of pushback from Catholic churches. They even released a list of these team life and team
Mm.
death. And the team death were all of the politicians who were supporting contraception for all, and then your team life if you do not
That's a really
support it.
provocative way
But
of framing
ultimately,
it.
very much. And it's one of those rare cases where the church really went all out. But ultimately, because the president was pushing for that bill, then it became a law. So, for example, former President Duterte and our incumbent President Marcos, it's under their term that divorce bills were being passed. But because they're neither here and
Mm-hmm.
there on these
Right.
positions, it wasn't a priority. So, lawmakers were pretty much just getting the pulse from the people. But yes, the church does get involved. For example, in the drug war, a lot of the kin of the victims of the drug war turned to the church. There's this missionary priest called Father Flavi who actually won the Magsaysay Award, which is the Nobel Peace Prize of Asia, because of what he did, to lobby for justice for the victims of the drug war. And just a few days ago, we had this massive protest against flood control infrastructure project, corruption in the Philippines. And the reason why that protest was largely peaceful and was attended by almost 100,000 Filipinos, more than 100,000 Filipinos, was because the church mobilized. They literally, in their Facebook pages, in their churches, they really ask their members to go out and go out into the streets and express their dissent in a peaceful manner. So in the Philippines, I think in a society where we're grappling with issues like hunger, joblessness, poverty, I feel like the role that the church sees itself is that it has to be here for the people's needs now, and when it wants to um, influence policy, whether they deem it as, you know if it's the role of the church, then they will get involved.
And there's no law against that, right? There's no separation of church and state in that sense.
Well, there is separation of church and state, but the thing is, the church kind of like always frames it as, technically they're not really violating any laws. The church is kind of free to teach whatever, vote for this guy, vote for that guy. But I think because religion is so deeply ingrained in the Filipino psyche, when Filipinos decide on policy, decide on who to vote for, which which policy to support, or which corrupt official to ask accountability for, then usually they're also guided by what they learn
Mm.
from God, what they learn from the
And
church.
that stays true for even younger Filipinos today, right?
I
Yeah.
think so. And I mean, a conservative boomer could probably use the same Bible verse that the Gen Z person would use to justify why divorce should be legalized in the Philippines. So I think it's also a matter of framing, and how you interpret the Bible and how you interpret your
Right.
faith.
Okay. Thank you so much for chatting with me about this, Mara. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raying.
Yes. Bye.